is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Here now, Tony Bruschi.
Let's talk about a case that hits at the absolute core of what failed system really means. A case so brutal, so avoidable, and so unfinished that even with a murder conviction in hand, even with one parent behind bars for the next several decades, it still doesn't feel like justice. It doesn't feel resolved. And it doesn't feel like anyone has told the truth yet. Because in the middle of this mess, in the middle of the lies, the panic, the arrests, the shattered storylines, and the courtroom performances, there's still one question hanging over the entire tragedy. Where is 7-month-old Emmanuel Haro? That's the part that makes this case so unnerving, even more unnerving than the charges, the prior convictions, the staged kidnapping, the false police reports, or the mother's unraveling timeline. Because we're not talking about a child who wandered off. We're not talking about a missing person case with 100 plausible theories. We're talking about a baby. An infant who investigators believe was dead before 911 was ever dialed. A baby whose life ended violently, according to the father's own guilty plea. A baby who is legally considered a homicide victim now. A baby who has still never been found. Let's walk through how we got here. And then we'll walk right up to the edge of the one thing investigators still don't know. Emmanuel's location. It starts with a story that even in the moment felt like it was taped together with panic and lies. On August 14th of 2025, 7-month-old Emmanuel is suddenly reported missing. His mother, Rebecca Haro, tells deputies that she was in the parking lot of a store when a stranger attacked her. She says she blacked out, hit her head, and when she came to, the baby was gone. Kidnapped, just vanished out of the car seat. Well, she lay unconscious. It's the kind of story that makes every parent stop and take a breath, because the idea of being ambushed in a parking lot and waking up without your baby is almost too horrifying to process, which is exactly why these cases grab attention so fast. Kidnappings hit a primal fear. They activate every instinct we have as humans to protect the vulnerable, especially parents. But here's the thing about a primal fear. Investigators know how to separate it from primal bullshit. And Rebecca's story landed squarely in that second category almost immediately. Deputies arrived, started talking with her, and within minutes, the red flags were everywhere. No witnesses, no struggle, no signs of an assault, no surveillance footage matching her description of events. No suspicious vehicle, no fleeing suspect, no one in the busy parking lot saw anything, and most importantly, the timeline didn't make sense. The story Rebecca told was collapsing under its own weight before the parking lot had even cleared. Officers learned she had driven herself there. Surveillance did not show her being attacked or collapsing. Her route didn't match where she claimed she had been. And as investigators pressed for details, she abruptly shut down the interview. You know, like you do when your kid's been stolen. A move that always speaks louder than anything a suspect actually says out loud. And then the worst sign of it all, not a single physical piece of evidence supports an abduction. So the search for a kidnapper evaporated almost instantly, and investigators began working the case from a completely different angle. A homicide inside the home. Now, if your baby is truly kidnapped, you want the police to talk to you. You want to keep providing information. You want to give every detail, every memory, every hint. You don't walk out of the interview room. You don't go silent. But Rebecca did. And this is a moment when the spotlight shifts, not subtly, not gradually, but violently. Onto the other half of this equation, Emmanuel's father, Jake Haro, or as we call him, Monster. If you followed any of the national reporting on this case, you already know Jake's background is not a footnote. It's the center of the storm. Because before he ever touched Emmanuel, before he ever held him, before he ever stepped into a nursery, Jake already had a conviction for brutally injuring another infant, a child who survived, but barely. And somehow, this man, with a proven history of inflicting catastrophic harm on a baby, by the way, his own daughter, was allowed to re-enter society, father another child, and live without the level of oversight or intervention that would prevent something like this from ever happening again. It's not a crack in the system. It's a chasm. It's a canyon. That's child protection functioning at a level of negligence so absolute that damage becomes irreversible the moment another baby is born into the same orbit. Investigators looked at Jake's past, looked at the inconsistencies in the mother's story, looked at the absence of any kidnapping evidence, looked at the timeline, and the picture, it sharpened quickly, quietly, and in a direction everyone expected. The parents, and in a direction everyone except the parents seemed to understand. Baby Emmanuel wasn't kidnapped. He was already dead. And the so-called attack was nothing more than a staged cover story, a panicked, sloppy, easily disproven attempt to steer law enforcement in a direction that leads literally nowhere. The case intensified behind the scenes. Surveillance footage was analyzed frame by frame. Phone records, vehicle movements, statements from neighbors, prior CPS involvement, Jake's probation history, witness accounts, everything. And everything kept pointing in one direction. The parents' story was fiction, and Emmanuel never left the custody of those two adults alive. 8 days into the investigation, the facade snapped in half. On August 22nd, both parents were arrested, not on suspicion of kidnapping, but on suspicion of murder. And then Jake did something investigators probably expected, but still had to be prepared for. He caved. He folded. He pled guilty. Not to a lesser charge, not to something vague, but to second-degree murder. To assault on a child under 8 resulting in death or great bodily injury, and to filing a false police report. He admitted, in the language of the law, that Emmanuel died of violence inflicted inside the home. But here's the part that makes the case so chilling. He never disclosed where Emmanuel's body is. Even as he accepted a sentence that could keep him locked up for the rest of his life, Jake did not give the one piece of information investigators begged for, the one piece the prosecution desperately wanted, the one piece the public is haunted by. The prosecutors took the plea anyway. Now let's pause here, because this is the moment the entire story fractures into. The legal case and the unresolved horror at the center of it. Legally, prosecutors did what prosecutors do. They secured a conviction for murder even without a recovered body. They locked in a sentence of 25 years to life for the murder alone, plus additional time for the prior child abuse case. They removed a dangerous man from society. Bravo. He should have never been out in the first place. But emotionally, morally, investigatively, the biggest question, the most important question, is still unanswered. Where is Emmanuel? Let's talk about what investigators actually believe. Not internet speculation, not rumor, not social media guessing, but the conclusions law enforcement has drawn based on the evidence they've pieced together and the charges they pursued. First, they believe Emmanuel died inside the Haro residence. The plea agreement, the exact wording of it, reflects this. Prosecutors do not offer second-degree murder unless they have confidence in the location and context of the death. Second, they believe the body was disposed of before the 911 call was ever made. That means Rebecca's parking lot attack story wasn't a panicked lie told in the moment. It was carefully chosen as an alibi designed to explain why a baby who was already gone wasn't in the car with her. Third, investigators have identified multiple areas where they believe the parents could have disposed of Emmanuel's remains. These include remote desert terrain around the area where they live. Ravines and washes stretching towards Cabazon and Morongo rural turnout points and dirt access roads, waterways, drainage canals, or irrigation areas are less likely but still possible. Early investigation landfill routes are also being looked at. These are places with harsh elements, wildlife, and difficult access, places where a baby's body could tragically remain undiscovered indefinitely. Fourth, they believe the disposal was rapid, deliberate, and born out of panic, not meticulous planning, meaning this wasn't a case where someone dug a grave, mapped out a plan, or created a blueprint for hiding evidence. It was immediate. It was emotional. It was meant to buy just enough time for the kidnapping story to stick. And fifth, they know Jake knows. They know Rebecca knows. They know the answer is not somewhere in the thousands of areas of desert. The answer is locked inside the heads of two people, one of whom has already decided that revealing the location is worth nothing to him, and the other of whom is about to walk into the biggest legal fight of her life. So let's talk about Rebecca. Because Jake's chapter is written, his page is stamped, his cell door is shut, but Rebecca is the unfinished story. She's the one whose trial is still ahead. She's the one whose statements changed, whose interviews stopped, whose actions in those critical hours are still in question. She's the one who prosecutors believe played a knowing role, not necessarily in the violence that caused Emmanuel's death, but in the orchestration and maintenance of the lie afterward. Rebecca pled not guilty, and she may very well maintain her innocence all the way to trial. But if she doesn't, if she decides she wants a plea deal, if she decides jail time is one thing, but a lifetime, it's another. If she decides she won't take the fall sitting down, the location of Emmanuel becomes her only bargaining chip. And maybe that's how this is supposed to be playing out. Maybe that's what these two lunatics planned out in the background too. Dipshit will go down, and Miss Dipshit will dip her chip in the dip and float on down to the next salsa from hell. She has nothing else left. No timeline that helps her, no alibi that holds up, no explanation that matches the evidence. The only thing standing between her and a murder conviction is leverage. And the location of Emmanuel is the only leverage she has. And investigators know that, prosecutors know that, and her own defense knows that. Which brings us back to the systematic failure, because this didn't just happen. This wasn't a bolt of lightning. This wasn't unforeseeable. This wasn't a no one could have predicted this situation. Jake's earlier conviction told the whole story years before Emmanuel was even born. A man who inflicted catastrophic injuries on a baby should not have been allowed to re-enter a home with a newborn. Full stop. And yet he did. There was no CPS tailing him, no probation officer checking in constantly, no mechanism that said, wait, this man should not be in a room with an infant without supervision. This case wasn't a crack in the system. It was the system snapping in half. And the fallout is devastating. A baby is dead, a father is in prison, a mother is facing prosecution, and the one piece of evidence, the one piece of this entire case that should have been solved first, the location of Emmanuel, remains a mystery because the only two people who know have chosen silence. The investigation continues slowly, coldly, methodically. Search areas remain mapped, tips are still reviewed, analysis still gone over. Phone pings, vehicle data, travel routes, and environmental factors all looked at. They still run scenarios based on distances, timelines, and disposal windows. But there's a painful truth investigators are open about behind the scenes. If the parents don't talk, Emmanuel may never be found. The desert doesn't give back easily. Time erases a lot. And if remains were left in an area with fast heat, fast decomposition, and active wildlife, the ability to locate them decreases drastically with each passing minute, each passing month, week, and each passing season. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a father serving a life-eligible sentence for murdering his own infant son. A mother who may hold the final key but has not yet chosen to use it. And a system that allowed this to happen again because it failed to protect its most vulnerable. And a baby whose tiny existence had been reduced to a courtroom file and a growing pile of unanswered questions. The case isn't over, not emotionally, not morally, and not for investigators. Because even with the conviction, even with sentencing, even with the legalities tied up in a neat little bow, the most important question remains unanswered. And that's why this case still matters. That's why people are still talking about it. That's why every new hearing is covered, and that's why every time investigators step in front of a camera, the question they get first, and the only one they can never answer, is the same. Where is Emmanuel Haro? We talk so much about justice, but justice isn't just about locking someone up. Justice is about truth, closure, accountability, a final chapter. And this case is missing its entire last act. Rebecca's trial will be the next turning point. And depending on how that plays out, we may finally get closer to the answer Emmanuel deserves. But until then, until someone breaks, until someone chooses truth over self-preservation, Emmanuel remains out there somewhere in the California desert. A baby the system couldn't save, a child robbed twice, first by the violence that ended his life, and again by the adults whose silence keeps him from being found. This case is not over, not until Emmanuel is brought home, not until the truth is told, not until the last lie collapses. That's why we'll keep asking questions, and the questions that still hang over everything. Where is Emmanuel Haro? Your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube, please. If you are not already there, all you got to do is search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Type in this title of this piece, so you will find it, and you can weigh in. We would love to hear your comments. We do read all of them, so please do weigh in. And while you're there, please hit subscribe as well on the podcast platforms. If that's where you're at, hit subscribe there too, so you don't miss any of our commentary and coverage on these cases. Until next time, I'm Tony Bruschi. We'll talk again real.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.